Chapter 14. The day I stopped apologizing for existing. I didn't know it at the time, but I had been saying sorry for years without ever opening my mouth. I used to believe that humility meant shrinking, that being a good person meant erasing myself so others could be comfortable. I thought if I took up too much space, spoke too loudly, or showed too much emotion, I'd be rejected. So I learned how to stay small. I apologized in the way I sat, shoulders hunched, knees pulled together as if my body itself was guilty of existing. I apologized in my voice, soft, hesitant, always checking the temperature of the room before I said anything. I apologized in the way I let people walk all over me, thinking it was kindness when really it was fear. And when life broke me down, addiction, trauma, prison, relapse, I carried that same apology into recovery. I would sit in group sessions and hold my breath before speaking, convinced my story wasn't worth telling. I would smile after someone interrupted me, as if silence was safer than insisting I mattered. I would tell people about my growth, then instantly downplay it. Yeah, I'm clean, but it's nothing big. Yeah, I wrote that, but anyone could have. Yeah, I'm trying, but I'm not doing as well as others. It was a constant shrinking, a constant erasure. And here's the painful part. I thought it was holy. I thought it was what made me acceptable. But really, it was shame in disguise. It didn't hit me all at once. Healing rarely does. It came like a whisper during one of those long days at the clinic. A client was speaking, his voice shaky, his eyes fixed on the floor. He said, "I feel like furniture." Present, but unnoticed. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut, because that was me. My whole life I had lived like furniture, present enough to be useful, invisible enough not to be a burden. I realized I wasn't just listening to his pain, I was staring into a mirror. And for the first time, a thought surfaced that I had never dared to name. What if I deserved to exist without apology? It was terrifying. My chest tightened. My throat felt like it was closing. Because if that were true, it would mean everything I believed about myself, everything I had built my identity around, was a lie. But the whisper wouldn't go away. That night, I went home and journaled. I wrote down all the ways I apologized for being alive without ever saying the words. When I lowered my head in conversations, even when I had something to add. When I gave away credit to others because I was scared of seeming proud. When I let people mistreat me, then said, "It's fine," even though it wasn't. When I started a sentence with sorry, but even though I had nothing to be sorry for. When I laughed at jokes that cut too close, just so I wouldn't make things awkward. By the time I was done writing, the page was full. I stared at it in disbelief. This is how I've been living, I thought, as if my whole life is an inconvenience to others. That night, I cried, not out of sadness, but out of grief, because I realized how many years I had wasted apologizing for simply being here. And right there, in the silence of my room, I whispered something new. I'm done apologizing. It didn't feel powerful, it felt shaky, but it was a start. The next day, I tried it. I walked into group without lowering my head. I didn't say sorry when I gave my opinion. I spoke like I believed I had a right to. And for the first time, I felt something shift. No one glared. No one rolled their eyes. The world didn't collapse. In fact, people listened. And that's when it hit me. The world wasn't the one silencing me, I was. But breaking that pattern didn't happen overnight. It was war. Every day my brain screamed, don't speak, don't shine, don't take up space. But my soul whispered, stay, stand, speak. It was messy, imperfect, awkward. But with each moment, I was learning the truth. Existence itself is not an apology. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. Because what would happen when I really stopped apologizing, not just in therapy rooms, but in life, at work, with family, with love? What would happen if I fully believed I had the right to exist unapologetically? And that question scared me more than relapse ever did, because it meant stepping into a version of myself I had never met before. Once I made the decision to stop apologizing, I thought things would get easier. I imagined myself walking into rooms with confidence, owning my story, speaking freely without hesitation. I pictured this new me who was untouchable, grounded, bold, free. But in reality, it felt like learning how to walk again after years of crawling. Every step was shaky. Every word felt foreign. Every boundary felt like a battle. Because apologizing wasn't just a habit. It was muscle memory. It was built into me from childhood, the way I learned to survive. When you grow up believing that love is conditional, you start bargaining with your very existence. You think, if I'm quiet, maybe I'll be loved. If I don't ask for too much, maybe I'll stay safe. If I'm agreeable, maybe they won't leave. So when I started saying no without an explanation, it felt like rebellion. When I looked someone in the eye and didn't shrink, it felt like war. When I spoke my truth without cushioning it in apologies, my heart raced like I had committed a crime. And maybe, in a way, I had. Because in my old story, existing unapologetically was a crime. I remember the first time I tried it outside the safety of the clinic. I was with a family member who had always dismissed me. In the past, I would have nodded, agreed, stayed silent just to keep the peace. But this time, something rose up in me. They made a comment about my past, something like, "You'll always be that guy no matter how much you change." The old me would have laughed it off, or gone quiet, or whispered sorry under my breath. But that day, I looked them in the eye and said calmly, "That's not who I am anymore, and I don't owe you an apology for growing." The room went silent. My chest burned. My hands shook under the table, but I didn't back down. And in that silence, something powerful happened. I realized I had survived it. The world didn't end. The rejection I feared didn't crush me. I walked away from that moment taller, lighter, freer. Still, it wasn't just about speaking up to others. The hardest part was speaking up to myself, because I had been apologizing inwardly for years. I apologized to myself for my scars, for my record, for my addictions, for my losses. I apologized for not being good enough, even in the privacy of my own thoughts. And healing meant confronting that voice head on. I started journaling the words I had never said to myself. You don't need to be sorry for surviving. You don't need to apologize for your intensity. You don't need to apologize for being emotional, for feeling deeply, for wanting more. You don't need to apologize for existing. At first, it felt corny, fake, like I was writing affirmations that belonged on a poster. But the more I repeated them, the more I realized how desperately I needed to hear them. because no one had ever said those things to me, so I had to say them to myself. Then something unexpected happened. The more I stopped apologizing, the more I saw how many people around me were still trapped in that same cycle. The woman who said sorry for crying in group, the man who apologized for taking too long to share his story, the teenager who whispered his truth like it was a crime. I saw myself in all of them, and without even planning it, I started interrupting their apologies. When someone said, "Sorry, I'm talking too much," I told them, "No, you're not. You're allowed to take up space." When someone said, "Sorry for crying," I reminded them, tears don't need apologies. They're proof you're human. When someone whispered their truth like it was shameful, I said, "You don't need to apologize for being real." That's the bravest thing you can do. And every time I said those words to them, I heard them echo back into my own soul. But here's the truth. The moment you stop apologizing for existing, not everyone will celebrate it. Some people are comfortable with you being small. They benefit from your silence. They like you better when you're manageable, agreeable, easy. And when you start showing up fully, when you start speaking with conviction, walking with strength, carrying yourself with dignity, they'll push back. I've lost relationships because of this. Some people couldn't handle the new version of me. They called me arrogant. They said I'd changed too much. They missed the version of me that let them take up all the space while I disappeared. At first, that hurt badly. I wanted to go back to shrinking just to keep them around, but then I realized losing people who only loved me when I was small is not a loss. It's liberation. Because the people who truly see you, who truly love you, will never ask you to apologize for existing. Still, this shift raised deeper questions inside me. If I'm no longer apologizing for being here, what do I do with that freedom? If I stop shrinking, what will I build with the full weight of who I am? If I claim my seat at the table, what conversations will I finally start having? And maybe the scariest question of all, what if I discover that being unapologetically me changes everything? My relationships, my career, my purpose, my future. I wasn't sure I was ready for those answers, but I knew this. The days of apologizing were over, and the days of becoming fully unapologetically alive had just begun. The first real test came when I walked into a room full of people who still saw me as the old me. My chest tightened. My old instinct screamed, "Shrink, apologize, disappear." But for the first time in my life, I didn't. I walked into that room and felt the weight immediately. Eyes followed me. Whispers floated. I could almost hear the unspoken words. That's the addict. That's the felon. That's the one who messed it all up. For years, this was my trigger. I would shrink inside myself, speak softer than normal, even laugh at jokes that weren't funny, just to soften the tension. I would apologize with my body, my silence, my nervous grin. But that day was different. Something in me had shifted. I didn't lower my gaze. I didn't force a smile. I didn't rush to prove I belonged. Instead, I inhaled slowly, lifted my chin, and let my presence speak for itself. I sat down at the table, not at the edge, not in the back row, but right in the middle. And I didn't apologize. At first, the old voice in my head screamed, "They're judging you. They're waiting for you to mess up. They'll never see you differently. But another voice, a newer one, whispered back, and let them. You don't exist to be digested by their approval. You exist because you're here, and that's enough. That whisper became my anchor. It wasn't easy. My hand still trembled under the table. My stomach still knotted. But I realized something powerful in that moment. Courage doesn't mean the fear disappears. It means you stop bowing to it. And by choosing not to shrink, I gave myself permission to finally live in my own skin. The funny thing is, when I stopped apologizing, something unexpected happened. The tension in the room shifted. A few people softened. A few people even nodded. Because confidence, real confidence, the kind rooted in honesty, not arrogance, is contagious. I wasn't pretending to be better than anyone. I was simply refusing to treat myself as less. And that subtle shift, it was magnetic. Later that day, someone from that very room pulled me aside. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't know what's changed about you, but it's different. You carry yourself like you finally believe you deserve to be here. And honestly, you inspire me." I nearly broke down right there because for years I had been starving for those exact words, but I realized in that moment that I didn't need them anymore. His words were confirmation, not oxygen. I no longer needed permission to exist. I had already given it to myself. That's the freedom that comes when you stop apologizing for existing. You begin to notice how much energy you wasted trying to be palatable, invisible, good enough. You start to reclaim all that energy and redirect it toward things that actually matter, your healing, your purpose, your future. I used to walk into rooms scanning for danger. Now I scan for opportunities. I used to wait for validation. Now I bring value. I used to shrink in the face of judgment. Now I stand in the truth of my survival. And let me tell you, that shift doesn't just change how others see you. It changes how you see you. But here's the twist no one tells you. Once you stop apologizing, life doesn't magically become smooth. In fact, it often gets harder at first, because now people can't manipulate you with guilt. They can't control you with shame. They can't feed off your silence. And that unsettles them. Some people will leave, others will talk. A few will even try to tear you down. But you'll realize quickly that's not rejection, that's clarity. Because the people who are truly meant to walk with you will never require you to apologize for breathing. Now, here's the part I didn't expect. When you stop apologizing for existing, you don't just free yourself, you free others. I started noticing it in the groups I ran, in the conversations I had, even in passing interactions. When I stood tall in who I was, it gave others permission to stand taller too. When I told my truth without flinching, it made room for others to tell theirs. My unapologetic presence became a mirror, and in that mirror, people saw their own worth reflected back. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about me. It was about the people who had been apologizing for existing their whole lives too, and were waiting for someone to show them another way. But freedom always comes with responsibility. The more I lived unapologetically, the more I had to wrestle with one question. Now that I've stopped apologizing for existing, what will I build with the space I've claimed? Do I just enjoy the freedom for myself, or do I use it to create space for others? Do I play small again to keep the peace, or do I risk everything by walking fully in my purpose? That's the question that keeps me up at night. Because no one warns you, once you stop apologizing, life demands more of you. And I'm still figuring out what that means. The day I stopped apologizing for existing was the day I started asking a new question, one scarier than anything before. If I'm no longer hiding, no longer shrinking, no longer begging to belong, what kind of life am I truly capable of creating? And the answer to that question, that's where the real story begins.